Hi everyone, welcome to the this week's episode of the Parade Planners podcast. We have a special guest today. We got Kevin Papetti. Kevin, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself?
Perfect. So I'm Kevin Papetti. I write for Maple Leafs Hot Stove as a contributor there. I've also written for Pension Plan Puppets in the past. Big Leafs fan. Big I guess prospects fan as well, whether it's Marlies or the NHL draft. And yeah, excited to join you guys today.
Man, I bet you're a parade planner yourself too.
Yeah, I think we'll see what happens this year, but I think we'll have to start actually planning the parade if they keep playing like this. So I guess we'll cross our fingers.
Hopefully, man. Well, we do this little segment on our podcast called Reasons to Plan the Parade. So, like, every week we kind of just give a reason that we think the Leafs are doing well, or even if you think there's a reason the Leafs aren't doing well. So, we kind of just go around, just give you a reason for why you think the Leafs are really good right now and what they're doing well to kind of push themselves towards that ultimate goal. So, Kevin, why don't you go first and give us your reason to plan the parade?
I guess I'll go with Jack Campbell just because the goaltending was a bit shaky. I think the previous week, right? So I think this week it's been much better. I know Rittich wasn't tested all that much against Vancouver, but it did seem like a big concern about a week ago. And if you look at it now, I think it's feeling better. I know Jack Campbell's doing pretty well by the numbers. He just had a bit of a blip in the radar there. So obviously goaltending is the most important position.
Yeah, man, he's been rock solid, and we're gonna need him to like play at least at this level throughout the playoffs. Otherwise, there's gonna be a lot of problems, especially because we don't know what's gonna be going on with Freddie, and who knows.
Yeah, bit of a mystery at this point, but we'll hope for the best.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, Danigan, why don't you go next? What's your reason to plan the parade?
Yeah, so my reason, I feel like I say this reason every week, but I gotta say depth scoring again. Yesterday we rested a couple of guys, and we saw guys like Brooks, Engvall come in and produce. Engvall had that nice little snipe there. He looked a little like Matthews. But yeah, like the depth scoring is gonna be a huge factor in the playoffs, and hopefully that continues on.
Yeah, man, like I don't think any team can win without depth here in the NHL. All right, Jaskaran, what's your reason to plan the parade?
My reason is just sticking up for your teammates. Like you see Edler going on with Hyman, you never want to see that kind of stuff. So Simmons goes after him. Well, like Edler's never fought an NHL fighter before. So you just like to see like it not get like thrown away out the window. Like people are saying the bench was just looking, they're doing nothing. You know something's gonna come up, and in the first minute or like first couple of minutes, Simmons threw down with Heidler, and they just went after it. And it was nice to see that because previous team never did that before. Yeah.
Yeah, man, like you kind of got to do that stuff to be successful in the playoffs. Like never seen the Leafs really do this kind of stuff before, so it's nice. Harmon, what's your reason?
My reason to plan the parade is when you have like Matthews, Marner, and Tavares and Nylander. So like all your big players are scoring and contributing to the game. If you have that on a consistent basis, going into the playoffs, you will be successful. So that's my reason to plan the parade. Because if they keep this momentum up throughout the last couple of games here, and they carry this momentum in the playoffs, I feel like they will compete at like a higher level, and they will not be matched against other teams.
Yeah, hopefully you can get at least out of the first round. All right, my reason is I'm gonna say Kyle Dubas and just the whole management in general. I just love the way that like you look season to season and they're adapting, right? Like they're not stubborn and stuck in their ways. They saw last year and the last couple years where a lot like they're really skillful, but they couldn't really surround their talent with like the leadership, the veterans, and like even just like that grit. Even though we talk about grit, but like the grit to kind of just like stick up for yourself and be competitive in the game. So Kyle Dubas did a really great job this year. This team is probably the best team I've seen as a Leafs fan. All right, so we usually just talk mostly about the NHL, but since Kevin's here and He's a bit of an expert on the AHL and the prospects and stuff. We had a couple questions for you, Kevin. If that's cool.
Sure. Let's hear 'em.
So one thing is, I don't really follow the AHL too much. I know back in like when I was in high school and stuff, I used to love the prospects, and that was mostly because the Leafs weren't the greatest back then. So the only thing to look forward to was the prospects, right? So what I wanted to ask you today was, what are the differences right now between Greg Moore's coaching style and his AHL system and Sheldon Keefe's? Because I know when Sheldon Keefe was down there, there's a little bit of a difference between Keefe's system and Babcock. So I just wanted to know what it is, what the differences, what the similarities are now between Moore and Keefe's.
Well, the Marlies this year haven't played all that much. I know they've been shut down for COVID as of late. They did get a few games in, but it has been quite a bit of a revolving door. I think just the consistency you see in the NHL level, and just in terms of players, makes a big difference. I feel like with the Marlies, it's kind of changed from, I guess, from last year to this year as well. I know I can't remember exactly when Greg Moore took over, but like they had like Ben Harper down there. They had some slower defensemen, some slower players. I thought they were more physical last year, whereas this year I do think it is fairly similar to what the Leafs run. But again, it's been such a revolving door, especially with the taxi squad, that it's really tough to draw conclusions from the Marlies this year, just because it has been such a short season, and we've kind of seen, Liljegren's in there half the time he's out. They haven't had Sandin for most of the year. He broke his foot, I believe. Like guys like Nick Batan, Nick Robertson, you saw SDA halfway through. So I think it's just been such a revolving door and such a small sample that it's really tough to make any firm conclusions just in terms of the systems itself.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits of having like a former AHL coach, Sheldon Keefe, become your NHL coach is that you have like a bunch of prospects coming in from the AHL to the NHL, and like they fit in right away, right? And last night we saw Sandin and Liljegren play. We've seen them play like here and there, like last season and this season at the NHL level. And man, we've been hyped about them since when they got drafted. I think Liljegren got drafted in 2017 and Sandin the year after. Um, but we got to see them play yesterday, and I was wondering, like how how has Littlegren and Sandine improved from when they first got to the AHL, and do you see them being ready full time going forward?
So I think they're both kind of just in different boats. I think Sandine was a player who was very good right away, almost surprisingly so. Um, come the first year with the Marlies, he was a rookie to obviously to start the year, his first season, and then by playoff time, I remember Callie Rosen got hurt, and Sandine was logging like 25 to 30 minutes come playoff time. Um, Sandine is better offensively. He's better at jumping up in the play. He's better at protecting the puck. I know people are saying he looks stronger. I think he's always been pretty strong. I don't know if his play style's really changed all that much. Obviously, he's younger than Liljegren. I do think that Sandine's ready to contribute. I think his play, in the last few games has kind of showed that. Liljegren, I think, could play in the NHL today. It's just they're a contender, right? So they're they're not necessarily going to change their lineup just to get him in. I do think some patience will be needed, even next year, because he doesn't have to go through waivers next year. If they like Bogosian and they can get him really cheap, or they want to run that Sandy and Dermott third pairing, for example, maybe they just keep Liljegren in the minors, even though he could handle an NHL job. They could kind of use him as a depth defenseman. But he's a guy that's really improved offensively over the years. I know when he got drafted, a lot of the talk was on his offensive game, but his first season with the Marlies, he was pretty cautious. Um, he wasn't taking many chances. He was kind of the type you didn't notice out there too much. I think he's always been a good He's a pretty good skater laterally. He's always been a guy who's pretty strong as well, although he is getting stronger. But I think just watching him against Vancouver compared to the games he was in the NHL last season, I do think he's taken another step offensively. He is more confident in jumping in the rush and rushing the puck up the ice, which is good to see because that's the potential you saw heading into the draft in 2017, and Slowly but surely. I think people overestimate how many young defensemen are in the NHL and on good teams contributing, and I think the patience will eventually pay off with him.
So Kevin, you talked about the revolving door with the Marlies. Would could that be a good thing with the with like could that be a good thing with the prospects, like having competition and not letting them like have a set position in the lineup?
Yeah, I think the taxi squad's kind of put an extra wrinkle into things this year. I think it's nice to get a guy like Liljegren a game like they did last night, just for confidence reasons. When he goes in this off season, he can feel like he's not 2 years removed from an NHL job. He did play games this year, so I think it's good for a confidence perspective. For the Marlies itself, they've been able to experiment with a bunch of players this year. Noah Hoffenmeyer comes to mind, Riley McCourt, Jeremy McKenna, like guys that aren't on entry level contracts, but maybe could earn one down the line. We've also seen kind of a revolving door in net too. It's been nice to get Ian Scott back because he missed significant time with an injury. So yeah, I do think just the rotation between AHL and NHL has just maybe given the players some energy. I remember even Kenny Agostino played a game this year. I believe Patan played earlier this year for sure. It feels like a lot of players have gotten a chance, Nick Robertson being another, where they do get a look at the NHL. They do kind of get to see where they're at compared to other NHL players, and I just think it helps the development if you can kind of get a game here and there and see where you're at and compare yourself to, I guess, NHL competition.
So you talked about Nick Robertson there for a minute. I just wanted to get your opinions on what his game needs to be improved on, like, and like how he can like improve to get to the NHL and be a mainstay here with the Leafs, coming up in the years.
Maybe
So,
be as good as his brother.
yeah, his brother's really good. Um, I think with Robertson, because he is on the smaller side, there's going to be a lot of pressure on his skating. I do think he's gonna get there and be a top six winger. He is just so young. Like I think he was a week away from being eligible for the 2021 draft. And you look at guys like I know Byfield made his debut this week. Lafreniere hasn't really gone as expected so far. I mean, he kind of looks like a teenager in the NHL at times. With Robertson, I just think he'll get there. He wins a ton of battles for his size. He's got a great shot. I do think the skating, if he can get just a little bit quicker, I think any player will improve just from a little bit more speed. I guess defensively too, he doesn't. If you think of guys like Angel Makayev that are bigger and cover a ton of ground and have a long reach, he's kind of the opposite of that, where he's obviously smaller, not quite as fast in a straight line. Um, and I think defensively he'll have his work cut out for him as a smaller player, as most smaller players do. But I do think he's a guy that's going to be on the Leafs next year. I think he's close. I think even when he's in the NHL level, it looks like he belongs. And they're going to need players like him because obviously they have some big contracts on the books. Matthews, Marner, Tavares come to mind. They're going to need some guys on their entry level contracts, and I think this year they want to. It looks like his contract's going to slide, which will kind of help them in the future. I don't think he knocked down the door for a job. I think he was, with the Marlies, he was one of their best offensive players, but I do think that he does look, you can tell he's not at his absolute peak. So I think the competitiveness is there. I think the shots there. He's very skilled. I think you just give him another year to get a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a little bit more power in his skating stride, and he's going to be a good NHL player for quite some time. I'm quite confident in that.
Switching over, so Adam Brooks, we you've seen him on the AHL, and seeing him in the NHL succeeding how he is, what can we expect from him in the future, and could he be in the playoff lineup coming up in the season?
I'm really interested to see if he's in the playoff lineup. I would say probably not, especially if Riley Nash is coming back. But if he keeps playing like this, he's giving himself a shot. It does seem like he's jumped Engvall in the depth chart. Um, Depending on the role, like I do think that he provides more offensive skill than Engvall. I think Engvall is probably the better penalty killer. Obviously, brings some more size to the table. But Brooks is a player that obviously he dominated the WHL. He had a 130-point season. I think he had a 120-point season the year before. And that's really the reason the Leafs drafted him in the first place, is just, great WHL production. And then he got to the AHL and he didn't really stand out. He's not that big. He's not that fast. He is pretty skilled, but I wouldn't say he's got a shot like Robertson. I wouldn't say he's the same playmaker as a Marner or even a Jeremy Bracco. He kind of hit a wall, it seemed, as soon as he got to the AHL, and it did take him some time to kind of carve a niche for himself. He is a player that went on waivers earlier this year, so I was kind of hesitant to put him too high in any sort of prospect ranking because I did know he was going on waivers and wasn't likely to make the Leafs out of camp. But I just think he's such a likable person and a likable player. I think the teammates, I'm sure Joe Thornton and Jason Spezza just love playing with him. And I think I'll lean no that he's not in the playoff lineup, but he is someone who I think could compete for a roster spot next year. He actually played quite a bit of wing on the Marlies. I could see him as a cheap fourth line winger. I could see him as a guy that could play center, as he is now. Definitely, just especially with his salary being under 800,000, I think he's going to be someone who could certainly challenge for a role next year, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about his role next year, right? Because obviously with Anderson's contract coming up, and we don't know what's going on with that, and then you're gonna have to sign Zach Hyman. There's no way you can let Zach Hyman leave this team, right? So, do you think, let's say in a situation where we need the money that we have to trade Kerfoot, do you think Brooks can step in and kind of try to compete for that spot on the third line that Kerfoot has right now? Because to me, right now, it seems like Kerfoot's starting to look expendable.
Yeah, I can see Kerfoot getting traded. I'm not sure if I'd want Brooks as the third line center as plan A. Like, to me, I don't really want to play Nylander at center, even if there's an injury. Like, I would ideally want an upgrade from Kerfoot as the third line center, where if one or Matthews or Tavares gets hurt, you can, someone that you could potentially move into the top six and feel okay about it. So I think with Brooks, I'd probably pencil him in as the fourth line center or the 13th forward, and then go from there. I think he's got, I don't think I've seen a large enough sample from him yet to suggest that he'd be ready for that role. Um, I ideally would start him just with any player. Like I play like Liljegren, Sandin. I think you start him on the third pairing. You give them 20 games or 30 games to prove that they can handle that role, and then if they are, exceeding expectations, you can move them up. But right now, I wouldn't pencil him in for the third line center position. I just think I haven't seen enough of a sample at the NHL level, but I will admit that he is impressing me so far in his few games here at the Leafs.
So, switching back to the prospects, I wanted to get your thoughts on Rodion Amirov because I remember reading your stuff on Twitter. You're a really big fan of him. What what kind of skills and senses made you think that he was like a contributor to NHL, could be a contributor to the NHL level, and what and like how do you develop and how do you mention your prospects? Like how do you grade them?
So with Amirov, he is a player so the under 18 tournament's going on right now. So a couple of years ago, that same under 18 tournament, he had 9 points in 7 games. So he was on the tournament all star team, I believe. I think it was Jack Hughes, Cole Caulfield, Rodion Amirov, and he wasn't eligible for that year's draft. He has a late birthday, so he fell into the following draft. So I think you saw just the scoring potential with him there. He's also someone who played in Canada. They do the Russia versus CHL series. He was in that. I believe he also played at the Olinka. I also saw him play at the World Junior A Challenge. Like everyone who would follow the draft closely definitely had a chance to see him play because he was on Russia just tournament after tournament. And I think you could definitely see the offensive potential. You scored a lacrosse goal just before the draft, and he is a very good puck carrier. So I just think you'll get a lot of assists if you're able to just transition the puck out of your end and transition the puck into the opponent's end and just dish it to another forward. So I don't know if he's an elite playmaker. I would say no, but I do think his transition game was one of the best in that draft class. And I just think he plays winning hockey. Like he's a 6'1" forward who uh, very very good skater. Maybe I don't think he's captain in a straight line, but he's just better on his edges. Very good neutral zone defense. I think he is going to be a guy that can play on your penalty kill. I know it feels like we say that about too many players. I think he's going to be an actual asset on the penalty kill. Like I think he's going to be better than like a Kerfoot, for example. Um, I don't know if I love him on the power play, but if you're the Leafs, I think you're looking at your team for the next 5-10 years, and you're saying we don't really need the power play help. We don't really need someone that's going to be taking Matthews or Marner's job. That's not happening. So I just think he's someone who can be on your second unit. He can play on a shutdown line with his defense. I think he could do that. He could also, generate entries for someone like Tavares or Matthews. I don't think he's gonna, be a star playmaker, but he can make the simple passes for sure. The skill's definitely there, and I just think he's a well-rounded player that can do a bit of everything. So I didn't have him in my top 10, but I think if you're the Leafs at 15 and you're looking for someone that can, you know, provide value, be a safe bet to be an NHL contributor. You need that cheap contract on your books when you have, Matthews, Marner, Tavares. So I just thought it was a good fit, and I don't think he'll be ready next year, but even the following year, we'll see. I know he's so young that it's tough to tell how the year over year progression will go, but I wouldn't completely rule out the following year.
So we talk about other prospects like Nicholas Abruzzese, who hasn't played at all this year, or like even like Philip Hollander, who's been over Swedish and Lulia. I wanna get your thoughts. Who are your top 10 prospects, and who is your most overrated and underrated prospect on the Leafs?
Overrated, underrated. I think Topi Niemelä has been underrated. I guess I think he's the top five prospect personally. Like I know the World's Juniors people like to overrate, but he's been good for quite some time. I think when he got drafted, the Leafs were really praising his defensive instincts, and I would agree with that. I saw him as more of a defensive defenseman, despite the fact that I believe he's about 5'11", maybe 6 foot tall. He's not a big guy, but the skating's there. I think the transition defense is there. He holds his own physically for the most part. I don't know if he's going to be on a top penalty kill unit because he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he does move the puck well. And I think the offensive game has really come a long way. I know at the World Juniors he was just racking up points. I don't know if that's sustainable, but I just think he's just a fairly safe bet just because of you don't have to fix his skating. He's already a good skater. He's a smart player who really picks his spots well to jump up in the play. He's really improved as a puck mover to the point where maybe he gets NHL power play time now down the road. So I'll put him as the underrated. In terms of the overrated, I almost want to say Abruzzese because sometimes with the NCAA guys they don't end up signing with the team. So that perspective, we'll see what happens there. He's not signed by the Leafs yet. I haven't seen him play quite as much as I have the other top prospects. I'm just looking. I almost want to. I wasn't overly impressed with Ronnie Hirvonen at the World Juniors, but he is so young. I wouldn't say he's like massively overrated or anything, but as a smaller player who doesn't skate all that well, I do have some concerns. I think when you are smaller, there's more pressure on you to be an above average skater. Uh, Plenty to like about his game. He's skilled with the puck. He's a good playmaker. He goes to the net despite being small. He's kind of fearless, but I think he kind of could have the Adam Brooks type problems where you're a star in junior, but when the game gets a little bit faster, it does become a bit of a tough adjustment. So I'll say those two for now.
So I want to ask you, who are your top 10 prospects in the Leafs organization? Just list them 1 to 10 if you want to.
Okay, I'll try. So I won't go in order here because I don't have anything prepared, but I have to say Robertson Sandin off the top. I think they're kind of in their own tier. I put Amirov after that, Liljegren, Niemela, Aberzizi. I would go Hollander. I would go Mikhail Abramov, Hervinen, and then I would still consider Joey Anderson a prospect. So I'll say Joey Anderson. If you don't include him, maybe an Ian Scott, who I'm kind of we haven't seen him play barely at all, but I'm kind of intrigued by him. He's a bigger goaltender that had a lot of success in junior. Maybe like a Dmitry Ovchinnikov as kind of an honorable mention. He had a pretty good year in the MHL. I'll go with those 10. I think that's a just a rough list of who would be the top 10.
That's a pretty. I think that's a pretty good list. Now we're gonna jump over to 2021 NHL draft. Scouts been saying, "Oh, this is a weak draft," and I read your article on the trade deadline where it's like you just give up first round pick. It doesn't matter who it is or what it is. You give up an asset for Foligno, right? We'll get into the Foligno talk later, but the 2021 NHL draft. What's your thoughts on it? And what's your overall impression of what the prospect can bring to the NHL? The guys like Owen Power, Matthew Benners, and all those guys.
It's definitely weaker at the top. There's no stars per se. Like you don't have the Matthews or the McDavid or I think in the 2020 class it was such a deep top 10 where you could get a Cole Perfetti at 10. But the Leafs aren't really up there anyways, or weren't expected to be at all. They're supposed to be in the 20s. I do think that, in terms of depth, I think there's going to be lots of opportunities because there's just less viewings this year. So if you do have a good read on some of the prospects, and if you do have the Leafs scouting staff, I think you could take advantage and potentially get some steals later on. So I do think there is always going to be a lot of value with a first round pick. I don't know if the draft is all that weak and from a depth perspective. Like I'm not sure if this year's second round is going to be much different than the average second round, for example. But it is definitely a weaker draft. I'm not in love with as many players as I was last year. I haven't been watching as much either, but I will say that giving up a first is still giving up a first, especially when it's a late pick. I'm not sure, if the Leafs pick 32nd, for example, if they do win the cup, then I don't know if it's going to be a massive difference from last year, but we'll see come draft day because it is going to be a weird year just because of the obviously no OHL and just less viewings in general.
Um, so we've looked at the drafts prior to Dubas' draft, where Mark Hunter drafted Igor Korshakov over Alex DeBrincat. We're still not over that. I'm still not over that. He drafted Emily Rastanen and like all those guys. What's the difference in schemes, draft schemes with Dubas and Hunter if you compare them side by side?
Yeah, Hunter had taken quite a bit of bigger players, obviously. Nicholas Mattinen comes to mind. Keaton Middleton, Korshkov is bigger. Rastanen was bigger. So I think there's definitely less emphasis on size. Obviously, the Leafs have taken a lot of smaller players. Like Niemela is not all that big for a defenseman. Hervinen, SGA was small. Ovchinnikov is really small. So I think it's been quite a significant shift. And it's not to say that Hunter never took small players. I mean, Adam Brooks comes to mind. I believe Jeremy Bracco was one of his picks as well. Obviously, Marner was kind of his staple pick at 4. So I don't know if it's a matter like I don't think we could. It's as simple as saying like Hunter hates small players, Dubas loves small players, but I think that would be just the most obvious thing is the difference in size. I think the Leafs have drafted very well the last couple of years. Big emphasis on skating, it seems. Just a lot of players have just liked. Like I think the trade down this year, they had the 44th pick. They turned that into 2 picks, getting Ronnie Hervinen and Topi Niemela, and I think that was just a steal. So I think just the focus on doing things like that to get extra players is great. I don't know if it works 100% of the time. I think there was that one year they got Dermott. I think they probably had a chance to get Travis Konechny. It can't backfire, but I think they've just found a lot of good underrated players. I thought Abramov was a really good pick. I really like the Mike Koster pick at the time as well. So I think they've just I don't know if you want to rule out players because of their size. Either, we're not taking anyone under 5'10", or we're not taking anyone over 6'2". I'm kind of interested to take, just the best player available, and just often the smaller players are the ones that end up falling. So I guess height would be the biggest thing.
Going over to the trade deadline, it said in the article that you wrote you wanted Hall over Felino. Why is that? Like, can you explain it? Explain us like why did Hall mean more to you than Felino? And I know you talked about Felino as well in here, so I just wanted your opinion on that.
I just think Hall's a better player than Foligno. I do think that a power forward's nice to have, but everyone was saying Hall was having a down year, and at the time of the deadline, Hall had more points than Foligno in less games. So obviously, Hall's a guy with a lot of upside. He's a guy that won the Hart Trophy. Great transition player. I think he brings a lot more to the table offensively than Foligno does. It's not to say, I don't like the Foligno edition. I do think that, he's such a likable player. I was willing to go with a first for him. It just wasn't my plan A. So, yeah, I think Hall's just the sky's the limit with him. Obviously, when you win a Hart Trophy so recently, he could end up being like your second or third best player. He's that good. He's that type of player. And for me, I just thought he's just a better player. I think that's just the simplest way to put it. I think sometimes we overthink these things. Obviously, he's been pretty good with Boston. He's got 8 points in 10 games now. So hopefully he doesn't have the long playoff run with Boston. I know they're in a pretty tough division. I think they're going to be a lower seed, but I would have preferred him. But with Foligno, he's a nice guy to have around. Obviously, he brings some size to the table. Good two-way game. I think he's a good leader. So, not complaining too much with Foligno. I think obviously it's early on. He's only played I think 2 games or 3 games thus far, and we'll see. We'll see what he could do come playoff time.
Yeah, at least Felino's point per game right now, technically, even though they're secondary assists, but still.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love him offensively. We'll see where he ends up. I think he's a fine, third line type, especially because of his defensive play. But I'm kind of curious to see where he ends up come playoff time. I know they started him with Matthews Marner, and I know Hyman's not in the lineup, but I think it's a bit of a mystery what they'll end up with come playoff time right now.
Yeah, that touches on my next question. So, what do you think the playoff lineup looks like? Because, like you mentioned before, that Riley Nash was is gonna come in hopefully for round one, and then we have guys like Bogosian that are question marks still for round one. I know he got. I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but I think he got placed on long term IR. So that opens up a few spots. So what do you think the Leafs' bottom six looks like and the D looks like going into the playoffs?
Yeah, I think the D is just going to be so health dependent. I think if Bogosian's out, I think they're going to roll what they've been rolling for the most part, which is Muzzin Hall, Riley Brody, and then I think you'd see that third pair of Sandine, Dermott. If Bogosian's back, I think it's a bit of a competition whether it's Sandine, Dermott. I guess I'll guess Dermott for now, just because he's played far more than Sandine, but I do think that is a legitimate battle. But my guess it does sound like Bogosian might be out a while, so it might just be a Sandine Dermott third pairing. In terms of the bottom six, I would probably play Galchenyuk with that Tavares Nylander line. I think they play well together. I'd probably play Hyman with Matthews Marner. So then I'd have Foligno on the third line with someone like Kerfoot. And my guess is that it's going to be like a Wayne Simmons type on there, which is a pretty good defensive line. I don't know if it's perfect, but it's a fine line. I think maybe on the fourth line then you could see Thornton on one wing, Spezza on the other, and then if Riley Nash is healthy, you could see him there. You could put potentially Kerfoot there with Nash on the third line. It's tough to predict what Keefe will do with Riley Nash just because he's never played a game for the Leafs. If he is in the lineup, I would definitely expect him to take a lot of defensive zone starts, kind of take some even some tougher matchups because he is so good defensively. But I would, if he is healthy, I guess I would just guess, Thornton, Nash, and Spezza. You could be kind of defensive conscious on that line and let the other two, give the other two a little bit more freedom offensively.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, like having all these guys. Thing is, like with the Leafs, like nothing ever goes smooth. Like I know, like I shouldn't be saying this, but we'll probably get another injury or something. Like something terrible will happen, right? So that's good
I
that we
hope
have
not.
all these guys ready. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we saw it. I think in general they've had good depth on forward. I know like Janssen came in his rookie year, and I think he replaced Komarov. And then I think last year it was just the defensive depth wasn't great. They didn't go with Sandine when Muzzin got hurt. So I do think that just overall they're a much deeper team, but obviously nothing's guaranteed come playoff time. They could easily lose a 7 game series to any of the Canadian teams, especially Montreal, who I think is a pretty good team. So unfortunately nothing's guaranteed, but hopefully I guess I just want to get through the rest of the season healthy and go from there.
I want to ask another question. So like right now for like the goaltending, it's been a battle between David Riddich and sorry David Riddick and Campbell. Who do you think is a better starter? I know obviously Campbell has been getting more wins and has been more consistent, but he kind of lacks confidence. Why do you think that is?
Maybe it's just a new team. I think just with goalies, sometimes you have your off nights. I think it's definitely Campbell's net to lose at this point. It's probably more Campbell versus Anderson, but we'll see what happens. Like where Anderson's health's at, how he looks, how he feels, and I guess go from there. So we'll see if Anderson can get any games in. I do think if they're both healthy, that Riddick's probably not going to address, but he is a goalie. I think we've seen this year against the Leafs, he had saved 70 straight shots against the Leafs when he's back on Calgary, and I think he's at least a goalie that could get hot. So if a disaster happened, I think he is a good third goalie at the very least. I know he hasn't had the best start with the Leafs, but as a third goalie, I like him quite a bit. I know I ideally don't want to see him in a playoff game. Hopefully Campbell or Anderson just run away with it. Hopefully they go 16-0 or something. But if there were some bad injuries, if there was a disaster, at least he has a chance to win you some games.
Yeah, but with mm, we see big save Dave, but he was no big save on when the Vancouver games came up. Am I right?
He's been a
Yeah,
small save Dave recently, man.
yeah, he hasn't been good as of late, but I guess it's still early. I guess he's 3 games into his Leafs tenure, I think. So hopefully he can kind of be the goalie he was when he was up against the Leafs rather than when he's with the Leafs.
I think it's those the red equipment still. I think he needs to transition to some nice blue Leafs blockers and gloves, and maybe that'll help out.
Let's hope so. It needs something. I don't know what it is, but that sounds like a good theory.
Um, Transitioning to the off-season moves, what do you think Dubas's a main focus should be on? Like Hyman, Anderson, like who do you think is going to be on the roster like next year? Do they sign Felino or like what do you think is going to happen?
I think Felino's probably going back to Columbus. I don't think he'll be prioritized over someone like Hyman. I think goaltending is definitely the biggest, even ahead of Hyman, just because uh, it's going to really dictate how much cap space you have. So really, the question is going to be how comfortable are you with Jack Campbell being your number one, not just a 1A or 1B, but a firm number one. Because if you do think he's a 920 goalie that can play 50 games, maybe you go cheaper in that and get a backup, say like Riddich, just for example. But I think that's kind of going to be the first order of business. I think Zach Hyman will see what he wants. There's going to be a price that you just can't pay if he's going to get like 6 million or something. I don't think that's going to happen. But there's nothing stopping a team like Edmonton, Calgary, take your pick. If a team comes and blows them away with a big offer, you might be able to block. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, with the expansion draft, we probably won't see anything on that front for a while. But I think Hyman's definitely going to be a priority. I think goaltending is going to be a priority, and then after that, you'll kind of have to determine how much money you have left. If you have to trade a guy like Kerfoot, maybe you look at a Riley trade, although I don't know how likely that is. Things like that. And I guess the other question would be, who gets taken in the expansion draft? If it is a Kerfoot, maybe that frees up a little bit of room.
Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be tough, especially you mentioned that Riley trade. That's gonna be a conversation it's gonna stick all of next year, man.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out this offseason. I think there's an argument either way because they're a team that could certainly use him as their own rental. They're good enough to warrant that. But if there is a big trade out there, you can get a haul for him. It might be worth it to trade him before he walks for nothing. And I don't know if the Leafs are going to be comfortable with what he wants on an extension. I think he is going to get paid. I could see him getting 6.5, 7 million. So that'll be a tough decision. I know with Hyman as well. I think Hyman and Riley and Anderson even those are going to be tough decisions because they're well liked in the locker room and definitely well liked in the fan base as well. So if they do let them go, should be I guess a tougher decision for them.
Yeah, like I don't know. I don't see how they can keep him. So like, it's pretty much just a question of do you want him as a rental, like you said, or do you want to just follow that asset management sort of route and try to retain as much as you can for its value.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what they think of him. If they do think he's an elite defenseman, I could see them trying to keep him and move others or move pieces out besides him. But I do think that my guess is that the most likely would be that he stays, plays next year, and then walks. But certainly there's a possibility for a trade. I wouldn't rule out an extension even. So I think it could really go any way. I don't know how I would handicap the odds, but he is a good player. I think he is a little bit underrated by the fan base at times because he is so good offensively. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what happens there, and perhaps the playoff run kind of dictates what they think of him.
All right. Well, this next question is a little bit of a curveball. I hope you're ready for this one. So Carter Verhaeghe, this guy, I don't know how he sort of just popped off this year. Like I remember, like I used to follow the prospects a lot more. I mentioned this before back in like a couple years ago when the Leafs weren't that great. And I remember when the Leafs drafted him, and then he went from the Leafs to the Islanders, I think for Grabner. And then after that, I lost track of him. I just thought he was just one of those guys who got traded away from the Leafs, and then he kind of just fell out. Maybe played in the AHL or went to the KHL. But apparently after that, he got traded to Tampa, and then now he's in Florida, and then all of a sudden he kind of just like blows up again, right? So I wanted to know what your thoughts are on prospects like this. Like, how does a prospect go from flying so like quote unquote under the radar, as in a lot of teams give up on him, especially the Leafs who have a really good development team now. But how does a prospect kind of go from that, bounce around, and then just find a way to kind of find their game in the NHL and like contribute the way he has at like I think he's like pretty close to point per game, right?
Yeah, I think Barkov might have a little bit to do with it, but he's a good player. He did score in junior. He did have a lot of points. I believe he was on Niagara. So yeah, I think when they made that trade for Grabner, he was really the one prospect that had that scoring upside. I think the majority of what they gave up wasn't all that much. It was kind of a quantity for quality trade. But with draft picks, I think Zach Hyman's a perfect example where he's a guy that really didn't seem like he had a lot of upside at the start. He looked like he'd maybe make a career as a fourth line grinder, and then really made a name for himself. As the time went on. So I do think he did score in the AHL quite a bit, so he did have the scoring history. He was on Tampa for the Cup run, and then Florida takes a chance on him, a pretty low guarantee, and it was one of the signings of the offseason for sure. So it's not always a straight path, I guess, in terms of development. But when you do give up four prospects in a trade, you are taking a chance that one of the four hurts you. When you're trading Korshkov, for example, it's just one prospect that you're giving away, I think you have lower chances of one guy, ending up exceeding expectations. But when you give up four, who knows? All it takes is just for one of the four to kind of surprise you. So I do think they were a little bit surprised. I think we were all a little bit surprised that he's this good, but definitely a player who did score in junior, did score in the NHL, and is now finally kind of making him a name for himself in terms of points in the NHL level.
Yeah, I remember when he got traded, it was picture day, and it was like, nope, you're all gone. That was pretty funny. Um, so going back to Morgan Riley, if if you were to get traded, what would the package look like in your eyes?
Well, it's only a year of him, right? So I think you gotta, I guess, just take best offer. I think I'd be open to anything. Where if you can get, similar to when they traded Kapanen, they didn't, they could have used some help now, but they got a good value for him at the 15th pick and ended up taking Amirov. So if you could get a first round pick for him for just 1 year of him, I'd be interested, especially if it's an earlier first round pick, like a top 20 pick. And then I think you just want cheap players, so young prospects. That would be kind of my focus. Unless you want a third line center, perhaps with some term and on a good contract. But I do think that contract, or especially entry level contracts, are going to be the priority because you want cheap players that can contribute. That way, you have cap space elsewhere. So that would be my focus. Would be on NHL ready prospects, ideally that can help you, but really best offer available. I think you have to be open minded, otherwise you're going to leave quite a bit of value on the table.
Is that part of the reason that Nick Robertson isn't getting a chance to play as of now? I know they sent him down to the Marlies, but is that a reason why they sent him down because of the ELC?
Yeah, I don't think that he was like a star on the Marlies or anything. Like I think Patan, Galchenyuk were outplaying him. He did look like one of their better offensive players, but he's still a teenager, so I don't think he's someone that was so good on the Marlies that you had to give him a chance. I think like Liljegren's a perfect example of someone who is a good player on the Marlies, but because of the players they have and because of the fact that they're contending, they don't necessarily want to give a young player a chance right now. They'd rather go with a veteran like Bogosian. So I think it's similar to Liljegren, where yes, he does look pretty good, but no, he's not an absolute superstar to the point where you have to, move a bunch of players to make it happen. I do think that he could easily play over an Engvall like he did in the play-in series, but at this point, I don't think they see him in the playoff lineup, and as a result, I don't think they're, putting him into a pretty meaningless game to burn that entry level contract. So I do think it played a factor, but if he was, if he looked like someone that could be a difference maker time, if they thought he was one of their top nine forwards, for example, I think he'd be in. So I think it's a little bit of both. I won't blame everything on that, but I do think it is a factor.
All right, Kevin, we've been a little serious for the last little bit, just because you have so much knowledge and we learned a lot from you. But let's lighten up a little bit. We'll go around the group. I want everyone. We'll start with Kevin, but I want everyone to kind of give what their most memorable or their most favorite Leafs moment, like ever since you've been a Leafs fan, is. And like everyone, let's try not to like pick like the cliche ones like Matthew's 4 goal game or something like that. So let's try to pick some underrated moments that you would say is probably one of your most memorable. So Kevin, why don't you go first?
I think the Kapanen goal against Boston in the playoffs. I know they ended up blowing it, but I thought
Oh,
that
that was a good one. That was a great one, man.
that's yeah, the one against Boston. I know he had a big one against Washington too, so I guess you could go multiple Kapanen goals, but that one against Boston, obviously with the packed house, we haven't seen that in a while. That one just comes to mind as one of my favorite moments. I know it didn't; it was kind of short lived, but for the few minutes that it lasted, it was outstanding.
I remember Kapanen had that one goal. I think it was against Pittsburgh, where I don't know if the Leafs clinched the playoffs. And I don't know what year it was. It was either the first or the second year where the Leafs clinched the playoffs against Pittsburgh. And I think Kapanen either scored the game tying goal or the game winning goal. That was a crazy moment too.
He's a big goal scorer. It seems he got that World Juniors one. He had the Washington one. Just he's good timing so far.
Yeah, for real, man. All right, Danigan, why don't we get your one of your most memorable moments?
Yeah, so Mine was back in summer 2014. Um, like our management was terrible back then. I know we all know that, and I think it was Shani that came in and like he fired like half the management team, and he brought in a guy named Kyle Dubas, right, who later turned into our general manager, right? But I think uh, that hiring was a sign of things to come because like before that moment, we never had a guy like Kyle Dubas in our management team, right? Like when Kyle Dubas was brought in, like people were like, "Oh, who's this geeky guy? Like he's a guy who just looks at Excel sheets, all that, right?" Like they were so misinformed, right? And since then, like the entire organization has been on a serious uptrend, and I seriously don't think that would have happened if Kyle Dubas wasn't hired on that day.
Man, like honestly, like just looking at like the Kyle Dubas era versus even like the Nonis or like the Brian Burke era, like what a different team, man. Like it's unbelievable. Like if somebody told me that this is the team we would have, like even like 5 to 10 years ago, I'd be like completely in disbelief. All right, just Karen, let's get your favorite moment.
So my favorite moment was back when the Leafs. I just started watching hockey. I was still new to it, but my favorite memory was Joe Newendike going 2 times weak goals on the Leaf. That was just so. Looking back at it, it was such so happiness and like all the Leafs fans in the crowd, just cheering them on and stuff. Especially against the Ottawa Senators who had not Danny Healy, but Danny Offerson, who I remember used to throw shade at Matt Sundin for some reason, and like Darcy Tucker, who used to be one of the best like grinders like to ever play on the Leafs, and it was such a good memory, like no stress whatsoever, and just like those teams that used to blow leads and like those, it was just so nice. And another mention goes to Matt Sundin's 2002 game time goal to make it 1-1. Unfortunately, lost that game, but it was just so nice to see that.
Man, those are good times. Hopefully, we can replicate some of those series wins in these upcoming years. Harmon, what's your most memorable moment?
My most memorable moment is when uh, going to watch the Centennial Classic uh, downtown when they were racing Detroit, and then when Matthew scored that overtime winner, it was like it's crazy, and it was like so much hype, and that was the most memorable moment.
Yo, Harmon, remember me and you went together. Do you remember that Detroit fan sitting in front of us, chirping us the whole
Yeah,
game? Oh man, and then
yeah,
he had
yeah.
nothing to say at the end when the Leafs swept them. Man, classic.
Yeah, that was funny.
All right, well, my most memorable moment. I don't know if it's a moment, but do you guys remember the Kuhlman, Grabowski, and MacArthur line, like back in like 2010s? Like, oh man, like
That was a
that
godly
line,
line, man.
dude. I don't know what it was about that line, but like I love that line. I almost wanted to get a jersey of all three players. Like Clark MacArthur, for some reason, was like my favorite player back during that time. It was crazy. All right, well, let's flip the switch here and go to the other end of the spectrum. Let's get everyone's least memorable or worst moments. And how about we start this off by saying we can't say the 4-1 Game 7 4-1 loss. We can't say the David Ayers game. All right, we'll start off with that because I feel like that would probably be everyone's moment. So, Kevin, why don't you go first?
I guess the Kadri suspension play from, I know he got suspended twice, but I guess the most recent one. I thought it seemed like they had the edge against Boston that year. Obviously, he's out for the rest of the series, which kind of, I think tilted the scales. And it was just such a frustrating game. There were some calls that didn't get called, so penalties that didn't get called. Sorry, and I think that was kind of especially I guess the moment he got suspended would be the worst moment, but even just at that time because it seemed like that really flipped the series.
Man, it just sucks because like he was sort of doing what we want the Leafs to do now, right? Like what we want like Simmons and what like Thornton's been doing, like sticking up for the guys. But it just sucked because Kadri was the only one kind of sticking up for everyone back then.
Yeah. Oh well. I mean, it sucks to think about, but it was one of the worst ones for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man. All right, let's get to you, the vegan. What do you think?
Yeah, okay. So this might not be one of the worst, but it was pretty bad in my eyes. When I think it was in 2013 draft when Manta and yeah, Manta was available at the 21st pick, and we were sitting at I think the 22nd pick, and we were expecting to draft him, right? I think me and Balraj were like eager to draft Anthony Manta, and then Detroit swoops in and picks him at 21st, and then we end up picking Freddie the Goat, and it was just like a sign of the times, right? Like drafting guys like Freddie the Goat instead of highly skilled players, and
Tyler Biggs.
that was one of Tyler Biggs. Like you could list a whole list of them, right? Like it was terrible, and that was just like the lowest of the low, I think.
Stuart Percy, Jesse Blackard, man, the list goes on and
Matt
on and
Finn,
on. And I had so much faith in all these players for some reason back then. Like I don't know if I was just like a naive kid or what, but man,
Kevin,
that,
what'd you
that
think about that?
In terms of Goche,
Like,
Goche,
no, like,
Biggs, Percy, like the whole drafting
yeah, all
back in
those
the
guys.
day.
yeah, I wasn't. I guess following as closely back then. I remember when Goche got drafted with obviously the 3C upside. He was a player that was, I guess, fairly well regarded at the time, kind of surprisingly. I believe he went the NCAA route, and I wasn't the president of the Mantha fan club back then at all. I wasn't, I guess, following as closely that those drafts, but I know that was back in 2013. But I think there's definitely enough to go off of Leafs mistakes. Whether it was, I think the free agents really stuck out, but certainly they didn't get the draft picks that they should have, and really I think just the fact that they never really fully committed to a rebuild for so long is what hurt them. They were never really. I guess they did have top 10 picks. They did well with Riley Kadri, but never really kind of supplanted that with the free agent signing. So I mean, we could I guess we could be here all night talking about the mistakes between I guess 2005 and 20, let's say 14 when they finally got Nylander.
Man, what a dark timeline, man. What a dark era. All right, just Karen, let's get your moment.
Guys, you forgot that Gauthier won a gold medal with Team Canada at the World Junior Hockey Championship. So he got that, and guys, so, yeah. I got two. So before I was born, Scott Niedermayer was supposed to be a Leaf. So that really upsets me. Um, well, that pick that New Jersey got from Toronto was for the Tom Kirby deal. They traded that pick 2 years in advance. So when it's gotten that Niedermayer to leave, this it's been so precious and so beautiful. Um, Another blunder, keeping Poggy over Rask. Imagine Tuukka Rask with the Leafs right now. You just imagine that. Would
That should have been one of the things I said we can't say because that's such a horrible moment, man.
okay? Then I'm gonna say May 2015. The Mike Babcock hiring. I know he changed the culture here, but you know I have a reputation of hating him. Um, I know he
Yeah,
changed the
Kevin.
culture, but
Just Karen here is a noted Mike Babcock hater. So
Yeah.
just for the
Even
record.
then, like, were you mad on the
no, you
day,
know
or you
then
just
no then I was good, but now looking at it, that was one of the like that back then it was good. We didn't know who he was. Like we knew his his history. He won the Sochi Olympics and the Vancouver Olympics, but he won a cup with the Stack 2009. I think it was 2009, 2008 Red Wing squad where he had Nicholas Lidstrom who's don't get me wrong. I was excited for that. Like that changed like the tide turned right, but the way he was, the way he manipulated like Marner, he manipulated Matthews, and like he would go down to Arizona just to apologize. Like he don't want to keep his role, but the thing is that those things don't work anymore. And the things that came out after he was fired were outrageous. Like who does that as a human being, right? That's my thing. Like you shouldn't hire someone based on what they are, but you should hire someone based on as they are as a human being. Like you're coaching these youngsters who are 18, 19, they're coming into the league. You can't just, like the work ethic thing, like, but what, like, you shouldn't do that to a young guy, right? So that's my thinking.
All right, just Karen. I know you could rant all night about this, man. Kevin, what do you think about that whole Mike Backpock situation? I know it's been talked about over and over and over again, but still.
Yeah, I think it was obviously when he got hired, there was a lot of hype. With most coaches, it ends poorly. Either you win a cup or eventually you're gonna lose your job. I don't know if any, the vast majority of coaches get fired. They don't kind of leave on their own terms. I think he did some good things. I think he obviously there's some things that, he obviously apologized for the Marner thing, and there's been other situations that came out. I haven't really thought about it too much. I guess in the last year, I know it seems to be going well with Sheldon Keefe. Definitely seems like a good decision right now, just based on how the Leafs are playing. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with him if he gets another NHL coaching job or what happens there. Obviously, I know he's still getting paid by the Leafs, so we'll see. I'm gonna be interested to see if he ends up getting another head coaching job because it would be kind of fun to go up against him. A Leafs versus Babcock game would be kind of exciting to see.
Dude, I never even thought about that. That would be such an entertaining game to watch for sure.
Yeah,
All right, Harmon,
I
let's wrap up with your moment.
Um, I was gonna mention the David Aries game, but I didn't want to mention that because you just said that's not one of the things you can mention. But I want to mention that drafting Korshkov over like uh, a DeBrincat. I think that was like the second round had Alex DeBrincat, and then you drafted Korshkov just because he plays in KHL and he was like a bigger guy. I feel like that was a moment where I was like, they shouldn't have done this, and it was one of the worst moments.
All right, I got two. One is I don't want to say it's the worst, but it was definitely like upsetting for me. Is like the day I found out that Matt Sundin was going to Vancouver, because like for me, like growing up, like I started becoming a Leafs fan in the middle of like Matt Sundin's career here in Toronto, right? So like I grew up as a little kid idolizing Matt Sundin, and like he was part of the big reason I ended up going on to play hockey. So it kind of sucked there. That's probably one of my saddest moments. And then another one is even like Phil Kessel. Like as much as Phil Kessel got hated on, I love the guy, man. Like he was such a great player. I always had the most faith in him. He was such an iconic Leafs player, especially for that time. So when he got traded, I don't want to say it was the worst, but it was definitely bittersweet because it was like the end of an era, but at the same time it was like a call that something new was going to be coming in the horizon. And obviously, like looking back now, like it was a great choice and it definitely all worked out for the best. All right, Kevin. We're probably done for today. We'll let you go. Hope you had a great time. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. We'll have to see how the Leafs do. Maybe we'll be playing in the parade later, but definitely an exciting time. I think a little bit of a boring stretch here, I guess, with some meaningless games, but I guess we're just a few weeks away from playoffs, so should be interesting.
Yeah, 2 weeks from now, man. I'm so excited. This Leaf season has given me something to do during this pandemic, which is always great.
Yeah, I think that's all I'm doing right now is just watching Leafs games. So thanks for having me, and go Leafs, go!
All right, thanks, Kevin.